Hello and welcome to the Health Detective Podcast by Functional Diagnostic Nutrition. We bring you interviews from people who have conquered the trickiest of health challenges using the Functional Diagnostic Nutrition philosophy and similar healing modalities. You're going to hear from experts who have been through the ringer with their health issues and yet managed to come out on the other side. You can always visit us at functionaldiagnosticnutrition.com, but for now, here is today's episode. All right, hello, my friends, and welcome back to another episode of the Health Detective Podcast by Functional Diagnostic Nutrition. My name is Evan Transu, aka Detective Ev, and I will be your host for today's show, episode number 462 of the Health Detective Podcast. Feels good to be back with you guys. I feel like it's almost been 2 weeks, which is kind of weird. We never really do that, but we just had a really successful and fun live event that we did in late October. Also, if you guys have not seen this and you are watching right now, we did our first in-person ever podcast. So I mean like full podcast studio rental, able to interview the guest back and forth. And that was with Molly Eastman. She's one of Austin, Texas's probably number one sleep experts, at least from a holistic and functional perspective. So she was amazing. Now those videos do come out a little bit differently. So I want to explain that really quick. The video that you're watching right now, as is normal for us, is done live with our guest. So this is always under that live tab. If you go to our YouTube channel, it looks like we don't have a bunch of videos. That's not true. You go to the live tab and you can see hundreds of things that we've done over the last couple of years and the recent videos that we've done too. But with the in-person podcast, clearly that's pre-recorded. And so we do release that on the videos tab. So if you'd like to see that interview after you watch this one today, of course, you can just go to that videos tab and check it out. A little bit longer than normal, just because we had some extra time in the podcast studio. And if I'm going to pull a guest out of their home, I feel like it's only right to stay for a little bit longer than an hour. So please check that out there. Another thing I want to shout out is we actually have some podcasts throughout the rest of November, but you will notice it's a little bit slower than normal. That is certainly not because we're going down on content. If anything, it is the exact opposite. So if you are already an FDN trainee or graduate, you would be familiar with these terms. If you're not an FDN trainee, this is still just as relevant to you. So please check it out. We do something every June called Summer Open House. And Summer Open House at FDN is basically a month-long event. We have like usually 40 live sessions that, of course, they make me host all of them. I'm kidding. I love being able to do it. And I host 40 live sessions with you guys with these different guests, and we do case studies. We do business success sessions. We have keynote speakers. We have people coming in to show us about the FDN course itself. We're doing a mini version of that for Black Friday. So I can't fully announce the sale yet. I will say this. It is the largest sale in FDN history. We have never done something like this by a pretty significant percentage too. I think it's almost like, I'll go underestimate. I think it's like a 25% increase from our largest sale that we've ever done. It's probably more like 30 or 40, but again, I'd rather underestimate. All of this starts on November 10th. And again, just like Summer Open House, these events are made for people that have no idea what FDN is, people that are trainees, and people that are graduates. So you can get it at that link below. That's fdntraining.com/FDN Black Friday. That's fdntraining.com/FDN Black Friday. If you're watching this at any point between November 10th and December 1st, come register with us. We have an opening and closing keynote. It's going to be a lot of fun, and I can't wait to see you guys there. Okay, now for our guest today. If you are tuned in with us, remember our guests can't see that people are live. That's something that only the admins can see. So if you want to drop a hello in the chat to Dr. Scott, we'd really appreciate that. But Dr. Scott Sherr is a board-certified internal medicine physician, certified to practice health optimization medicine, and a hyperbaric oxygen therapy specialist. His formal titles include, there's some pretty cool ones, COO of Troscriptions, a line of physician-formulated, pharmaceutical-grade, and precision-dosed buccal troches. I think I pronounced that right.
You got it. Yeah, that's work. Yeah.
How did I do, Dr. Scott?
You did great. You did great. Yeah.
Nice. All right. Buccal troches containing novel ingredients like methylene blue, agarin, and others in formulas for energy, focus, sleep, stress, immune support, and more. His other title includes VP of Health Optimization Medicine and Practice, the nonprofit arm of Troscriptions, which trains practitioners on optimizing health rather than treating disease, and the third title here, because those other two weren't enough, right? Chief Medical Officer of One Base Health, a company building software and hardware to power integrative technology, including hyperbaric chambers, lights, sauna, and more. His clinical practice is built on health optimization medicine as its foundation. It's going to be a huge topic for today, complemented by an integrative approach to hyperbaric oxygen therapy that incorporates cutting-edge and dynamic hyperbaric oxygen therapy protocols, comprehensive laboratory testing, targeted supplementation, personalized practices, synergistic technologies, both new and ancient, and more. So thank you for letting me get through all of that, Dr. Scott. Welcome to the show.
I really got it. It was really nice just to have to sit here and just kind of breathe for a couple minutes. So I appreciate it. Thank you. It's good to be here. Thank you for having me. Yeah.
I would imagine for someone with multiple titles such as yourself, yes, even 5 minutes for the day feels pretty darn good. So
I loved it. Thank you. Although you're listening to yourself and all your titles is always interesting, as you can imagine, right? So
yes. So we always start the show in the same way. I was obviously reading everything about you, so I know it's going to be a little bit different for this one. But we always like to ask, just before we get into the topic, what the guests' health issues look like and when did they begin? And the reason that we ask that is because most of our guests have that. Now, I understand that you might be in a slightly unique situation because you were also the son of a chiropractor growing up. So if anything, I'd just love to know how you got inspired to get into this space. And I'd like to know what it was like growing up with a chiropractor as a dad.
You're totally correct that most people in my shoes right now would have their own personal journey of going to conventional medicine, knowing it failed them, and then going to more integrative alternative things to help them, and then deciding to become a practitioner in that space because of it. I'm in the minority here because I grew up, as you said, the son of a chiropractor. So I grew up, very out of the box. My father is a crazy person, and he's been crazy since I was born, and he's probably less crazy now than he was when I was younger. But what I mean by that is that he was very out of the box, right? Nothing was conventional growing up. I didn't know what dairy was until I was 8, and then I was lactose intolerant, obviously, because I never had it before. And that was a problem. It still is. So that's okay, Dad. I don't fault you. Dairy is not good for anybody for the most part. And so that was my upbringing, very alternatively, very out of the box. But as I was thinking about, I was in high school and college, and thinking about, I loved science, I loved the ideas of maybe going to be a chiropractor. It was like, well, you know what? Maybe I could become a conventional doctor, which was kind of crazy because I knew nothing about being a conventional doctor at all, and figure out how to bridge this huge gap or chasm between allopathic or conventional medicine at the same time with alternative medicine, right? Which is, it was a very big term. There was no such thing as integrative medicine at the time, functional medicine, functional diagnostic nutrition. There's nothing like that. Nothing like that existed. So I decided to go to medical school with that in mind. And then, when I was in medical school, of course, I was kind of tantalized by a bunch of different fields where I could make a whole bunch of money very quickly. And then I knew why I'd went there, and I always came back to that base, which is like, what do I want to do? I want to create an integrated practice and how to bridge these worlds. And so after I finished medical school, I did my internal medicine residency, which was kind of the fastest way for me to finish and get a good training. And then from there, I ended up specializing in a field called hyperbaric medicine, which I learned about in medical school, actually, and understood that it had a really nice capacity to do both the conventional side as well as have significant impact on the alternative side. And then from there, I established a practice that was initially in the Bay Area, doing work at medical facilities there, hyperbaric facilities there, learning how to do hyperbaric medicine in practice. And then over a decade, I really created an integrative framework on how to use hyperbaric medicine in a much more holistic way. And then from there, I trained in something called health optimization medicine in 2017, 2018 timeframe, which is a foundational approach to health that was really what I was missing on really the whole framework that I was already using with my patients. And really the key there to understand, and we can talk about this in more detail, is that if you want to be optimized to go into hyperbaric chamber, you better have energy production and detoxification under wraps, or really have a good sense of what's happening there, or you're going to have challenges, especially if you have a long-term issue or chronic complaint or long-term protocol that you're looking for. So that became the foundation of my practice. And that also was a time I met a colleague who actually founded health optimization medicine called Dr. Ted Achacoso. Dr. Ted's a fantastically smart guy, and he started this nonprofit that was training other doctors on how to do the same kind of framework. And so that's what I actually signed on to be the chief operating officer of that company, of health optimization medicine, which I still am today. And we have a 7-module certification for practitioners that are interested in really diving into like a foundational approach to health that's really focused on optimizing health rather than treating disease. And then from there, I established a couple of different companies, one called One Base Health, that was on the hyperbaric space, and another one called Troscriptions with the founding team at Health Optimization Medicine. That company was really trying to address what we saw as issues that people needed help with right now, while they're on the longer path of optimizing their health, which all of you that are listening probably know is not an immediate thing for most people. It takes a time to see the changes and the improvements that a lot of your FDN practitioners are hoping to get with their patients. It's not something that happens overnight. So how can you help them right now with energy, with focus, with stress, with sleep, and kind of break these sort of the patterns that people have had for long periods of time that are really required to be broken to see the significant benefits that you want to see long-term. So my clinical practice now is a foundationally health optimization medicine. I do a lot of hyperbaric consulting as well. And that is kind of what I do from a clinical perspective from my home here and just outside of Boulder, Colorado.
Awesome. Great background. Super impressive. And these are like my favorite podcasts. I always remember when I first started this for FDN like 5 years ago, I was so silly. I'm like, oh, what happens when we get to like 100 episodes? I think I'm going to run out of topics. And then here we are 400 something in. And I have a lot to learn today. I don't know really anything about this. I do want to go back to just one thing because it's pure curiosity. So you even mentioned that you were learning about the hyperbaric stuff more from that Western medical perspective. How do they typically use it? Because I've never shared this on the show before. It's not a secret. It's just not something that comes up often. My dad had a really serious incident approximately 8 or 9 years ago now. We almost lost him. He is a landscaper, and he was working for himself at the time. And it's a crazy story. I'll spare you the full details. But basically, he accidentally was kind of in a trailer that was mostly closed with a lawnmower on. And he passed out. What's even nuttier is my aunt is very like intuitive. She always has been. You guys can make of that what you will, but it saved my dad's life. She got a feeling that something was wrong with my dad. And the only reason he is alive is because she got that feeling, and they raced home and they pulled him out of the trailer. It was only 7 minutes from where they worked. He was helicoptered though to the hospital. And the whole reason I'm mentioning this is because I found out that hyperbaric is a part of Western medicine that day, because one of the ways that they rehabilitated my dad is by putting him in those, it's not like, the chambers that you see in the alternative space. From my understanding of what it was more like a room.
Chamber. Yep.
Yeah. So is it usually only used in extreme cases like that, or how else does Western medicine use hyperbaric?
Yeah, so it's a similar way that I actually experienced hyperbaric medicine initially was in a trauma center in Baltimore where I trained. And there's a large hyperbaric facility in the basement where they'd put in people with massive amounts of trauma, with severe blood loss, with severe infections. And so there's 14 indications that are currently covered by medical insurance in the United States. Of those, about 4 of them are used outside of the hospital. 5 of them maybe. The rest are really traumatic things like burns, limb ischemia, like low oxygen levels, or potential partial amputations or full amputations, and also severe infections like something called neck fash or necrotizing fasciitis, which is severe flesh-eating bacteria, which is how I first learned about hyperbaric therapy. And that's a very terrible condition where people have these massive infections and die, or they have to get their limbs amputated oftentimes. But I saw somebody that had hyperbaric therapy and was able to salvage most of her limbs as a result of going in. And I was like, well, what's going on here? This is just oxygen and pressure. That's really freaking cool. And understanding that there was much more that could be used inside the chambers to see massive benefit was really what was the light bulb for me. And that didn't happen right away because I was very tired during that particular rotation. I was on call every 3 days for 30 hours. So it's called Q3 call. So every 3 nights you're on for 30 hours. So you're on for 30, you go home, you sleep for 4 hours, you go up, you get up, you have dinner, you go to bed. And then for 2 days you have regular schedules. And then the 3rd day you're on for 30 hours again. So they don't do that to residents anymore because it's not very healthy.
It's insane that's legal considering you have the life of people in your hands, but that's good.
I know, right? I know. I mean, you were mentioning Molly Eastman earlier. Molly's a good friend, and sleep is a skill. Like my medical school friends and I had shirts that said "Sleep is for quitters." Okay, and so I mean that's just what you're up against. And sleep is such a big part of all this as far as health as we know now. But when you're in medical school, you don't really think about these things as much. You're certainly more resilient when you're 21 to 30 years of age. And that's incidentally the range that we use in health optimization medicine, as a quick aside, as the range we're looking for to optimize people back to when they were 21 to 30 years of age. Because that's when you're most optimized to sleep less and go and stay awake for 30 hours and still be functional. Although I don't recommend that at any age for any reason for the most part. But anyway, so that's a little bit of an aside. We can get back to that. But on the hyperbaric side of things, yes, that's how I learned about it from a significant trauma perspective. That's really cool about your dad, and that's really a great story that he was that he's that he was able to survive. And then interestingly, at the same time, I was learning about hyperbaric medicine from my father, the chiropractor, that was using it for kids on the autistic spectrum as well, and seeing massive benefit. But this is where it all gets very interesting, is that I really realized very early on in my hyperbaric career, once I was like, okay, this is a cool technology, I see that there's a lot going on here, that I realized very quickly, my first patient actually, that if you use hyperbaric therapy at the wrong time, it may not be very beneficial, or it could actually be detrimental in some cases. And that was because there's a significant need to understand, especially if somebody has a chronic issue, okay? Now, if you have an acute issue where you have an acute trauma, acute burn, acute infection, just getting into the chamber can do massive things in a beneficial way. And that's what happened to your dad. And I saw that a lot in the acute setting. But if you have a chronic issue where has something that's been going on for a long time, say you have a chronic infection, you have a mild impairment, like autoimmune problem, you have long COVID, you have fibromyalgia, you have chronic fatigue, all these things are often so multifactorial. And at the same time, if you're looking at what's happening in a hyperbaric chamber, what you're doing is you're flooding the body with more oxygen, okay? Now, oxygen, of course, we need to make energy in the cells in our mitochondria, but what also oxygen is going to do, when you give massive amounts of it, is create what's called reactive oxygen species, or oxidative stress, or free radicals, and all those kinds of things. Now, the body, number one, has to be able to make energy effectively. Can it do that? If you've been sick for long periods of time, the answer is probably not. Probably needs some support to be able to do that. And on the other side of things, when you make energy, it's not like you're an electric powered car, you don't make any exhaust. You are like a gasoline powered car. You make waste products, these reactive oxygen species that I was just mentioning. And so you have to have the capacity to balance that, or to neutralize that oxidative stress. And that requires antioxidant capacity, the amount of antioxidants in your system. So I realized very early on that if I didn't think about these things, and if I said, well, you're coming in with chronic migraines, let's put you in the chamber, you don't feel very good when you're in the hyperbaric chamber. You feel maybe a little bit better by the end of a protocol, but then your migraines come back and really no major benefit over the long term, or whatever you fill in the blank for the condition that's long term. It made me realize it really had more of a foundational approach. And that's where health optimization medicine really came in for me, was what is that foundational approach? And so I used to send people, and I still do, to people that are functionally trained, FDN trained. I have a lot of friends that are FDN trained at this point in my life. And I think that's great. I think that, but what I wanted personally was to have a foundation that I could use with my clinical practice. And the other piece of it was, well, I really wanted to understand the biochemistry here, really wanted to get down into mitochondrial function, electron transport chain physiology, understanding macronutrients and breakdown and antioxidant capacity. And so that's become a huge part of my clinical practice. And what I really start off with as many people that will let me, which is like, if you come to see me, or if you look me up and say, hey doc, I'd love to talk to you about using hyperbaric therapy for, let's call it fibromyalgia or chronic fatigue, but you haven't done a lot of this foundational work first, I will not recommend hyperbaric therapy under most circumstances, which is unusual, right? If you go to somebody that specializes in something, you'll usually get, well, you should use this technology that I specialize in. But that's not how I roll.
I appreciate that. And we definitely need a change there. Thanks for humoring me on all the hyperbaric stuff. I didn't mean
No, that's all good. I think it's a really great story. And I think that I love hyperbaric therapy for an acute trauma, for an acute inflammation, for an acute stress, acute stroke, heart attack, traumatic brain injury, even spinal cord injuries. Like, there is really good data that getting into a hyperbaric chamber fast is going to save whatever part you just injured. Okay. And so there's no doubt about that. But that is the exception to what we'll see in the field of hyperbaric technology, right? The field is going to be mostly people that have chronic issues. Like in the insurance world, this is diabetic foot ulcers. This is radiation injury from cancer. So you've had cancer therapy with radiation and you get an injury from the radiation itself. This is in people that have wounds that won't heal in other places, like their jaw or some other place, because of radiation as well. And so there's a couple of other things like bone infections and like flaps and grafts from plastic surgery. Like, all those things are all things that are covered by medical insurance, right? But in essence, if you have a long-term issue, a long-standing issue, you don't want to just go into hyperbaric chamber without understanding if it's the right time for you. And that's where I kind of did this sort of zoom out, sort of coming to, Jesus, God, whatever, like in the sense of what else was I missing in my hyperbaric practice. Yeah. And that's when I studied and really got involved in health optimization medicine because that became the foundation of what I do, and it still is today, because that's a foundational approach to looking at a field of science called metabolomics. Are you familiar with metabolomics?
I am not, and I doubt most of our audiences.
Yeah. So metabolomics, most of your audience already is probably doing some of the work here without understanding what they're actually doing, which is, at least in part, the field of metabolomics. So metabolomics is the study of small metabolites or molecules that are happening right now in real time in your cells. It's what we call the real-time workings of cellular processes. This is your vitamins, your minerals, your nutrients, all the things that are working and making your cells make energy, all the cells that are working to help you detox from the energy you make, looking at various metabolites of heavy metals, of fatty acids. So these are things that are very involved and very much integrated in the world of FDN and functional diagnostic nutrition. When you're doing organic acids testing on your patients, you're looking at metabolite levels. You're looking at metabolomics, right? Metabolomics is a really cool science because it actually does two things at the same time in broad strokes. The first is it's looking at various things that are coming from outside your body, where metabolites outside your body, from food, from water, from microbes, from toxins. You can see at this level when you look at it. But it's also looking at what's happening, metabolites in your cells, your mitochondria, your microbiome, your hormones, your neurotransmitters, and also what's happening, in the nucleus and the cytoplasm and things like that too. So you can look at all that happening in real time, looking at a metabolomic panel. And metabolomics has been around for over 30 or 40 years, and it's been called the 21st century's stethoscope because of the power that you have here. And the power of it is that you don't want to look at things in sort of isolation. You look at everything as a network. Your micronutrients, your heavy metals, your intermediates in mitochondrial metabolism, your antioxidant levels, these are all working in conjunction together. And that's what's so important about looking at a full panel as opposed to looking at just one or two pieces of this. Like, I think micronutrient testing is good, but it's not complete because you don't have a good sense of what's happening from a heavy metals perspective or a fatty acid perspective or a microbiome perspective. And that's what health optimization medicine is trying to bring it to, this sort of, I guess, additional level of optimization, right? Not just looking at one particular piece of it. And the other big piece of what we do is that, and I mentioned this earlier, is that we're not just trying to optimize between 21 and 30 years of age. We're trying to optimize we're not trying to optimize you from like how old you are. Like if you're normal,
Gotcha.
like normal, if you're normal for a 45-year-old and normal for a 65-year-old, whatever. We're trying to optimize you so that when you're optimized for when you can help, that we're optimized right now, right? Optimized to 21 to 30 years of age is what I mean. So like that's when we're most optimized to be the best we are from a physical perspective, from a resilience perspective overall.
Cool. Can we, I don't want to backtrack us too much here, but just because genuinely the health optimization medicine was a new term to me.
Yeah.
So just so we're all on the same page for the remainder of the podcast, can we kind of define that? Because I was looking into it, obviously, beforehand. I thought it was so cool, and I'm paraphrasing it, but it almost seemed like, I feel like the biohackers, which I fall into that category, they are people that try to optimize. This seems, with all due respect to my fellow biohackers, a much more technical and sound way to continue to improve health rather than just throw thousands of dollars worth of gadgets at myself, even though I love doing that. So can we define this health optimization medicine, please?
Yeah, so Health Optimization Medicine is the nonprofit organization that we run. And it was a term that was developed by Dr. Ted, who's the founder of our nonprofit. He's also founder of Troscriptions as well, that makes some of the products that help people right now. And the idea was, health optimization is not something, we're always going to be optimizing our health. It's not like there's ever a final piece of this. It's like not like you get to a certain, letter in the alphabet and you're done. No, it's like it's something that's happening throughout our lives. And what he really defined here was the definition of health. And this is different there's a lot of different definitions of health out there, but we have our own definition of health. This is Dr. Ted's definition. It's health equals A plus B plus C. And the A here is the absence of disease. And so it's health equals the absence of disease is the A. So, and what we often say in correspondence to that is that just because you're not sick doesn't mean you're well. It just means you're not sick at the moment, yes. Right? And so that, which means you mean under the hood, you might have much more going on there than you realize, right? And that's what testing can be so helpful for. And then the B is the balance of anabolism and catabolism. So anabolism is the building up of tissue, and C is the breaking down, or the catabolism is the breaking down of tissue. So you always want to have a balance of that. And when we're younger, we're more on the anabolic side, and as we get older, in our 40s, 50s, and 60s, that's becoming more catabolic, and we want to always make sure we're balancing that. And then C is the life cycle. C is the cycle here of the organism. Like, where are you in the life cycle of you? What goals do you have? And then making sure you're balancing and optimizing to that particular level. And so that's our definition. And then the other big piece for us in health optimization medicine, as I was mentioning, is that we don't want to be normal for a 45 or 55 or 75-year-old. Like, if you look at lab ranges, for the most part, the ranges that you see from a regular lab panel are normals between 18 and 65, 18 and 90. Sometimes your TSH levels, like, for example, are average between 8-year-olds and 90-year-olds, right? So do you want to have a TSH level of a 94-year-old? No, you want to have like a TSH level potentially of somebody that's the best optimized that they can be. And that's why we look at our normal ranges between 21 and 30 for your nutrient levels, for your hormone levels, for your neurotransmitter levels, because that's when we're most optimized. And so our definition of health is using that A plus B plus C analogy, and then optimizing your networks of your nutrients, your everything that I just described earlier, between 21 and 30 years of age. And that's how we define health optimization medicine. Because if you're doing it in that capacity and doing it in a networked way, it's not like you're just moving one B vitamin or one hormone. You're looking at moving all these networks to the 21 and 30 years of age range. Then that's when you have optimized your health. That's when you're going to be the most optimized that you can be for that moment. And then, of course, things are going to change. You're going to have different stress. You're going to have different things that happen in your environment. All that's going to happen. Then you're always going to that's why it's a continuous process and not just like a one period of time optimization, which most of your listeners will know. It's not just, one person, one time, then you're good. See you in forever. No, this is a continuous process.
Yeah, especially for those of us that I think have been more subject to chronic disease. Because listen, I'm doing well, but I always it sends a little thing up my spine with how many people that I have the privilege of talking to as guests that are older than me that come on and reference like, 20 through 30 is when, I could stay up all night and do all that stuff. I'm like, I can't do that. I haven't been able to do that at all. Right. I was sick from 5 to 18. And I was staying up, all the time then, mostly with anxiety and things like that. That's what I mean. And so by the time I was, in my mid 20s, staying up till 2 a.m, I feel like I'm hungover the next day. If I were to do that. Now, I've worked on some other things to support that as well. Not that I'm trying to stay up till 2 a.m. all the time, but, yeah, I definitely would like to move myself back a little bit. So it also sounds like this would be more of the phase that I'm in where, I no longer meet the diagnostic criteria for any of 7 health conditions that I once had diagnosed at the age of 18. So that's progress. That's great. FDN pulled me out of the water then. But then I'm always looking to optimize and also how do I participate in today's world still? Because I am very confident that if I went and lived in Sardinia, Italy, and had a low stress lifestyle and worked part-time and, had my family there, whatever, I probably would feel like $1 million. But I love doing the podcasts. But the result of that is I'm surrounded by a bunch of EMF right now. I'm living in downtown Austin. I would not compare that to Sardinia, Italy necessarily.
No, agreed. Yeah.
From what I saw on the website and from what it sounds like here, it's like, is your ideal client then someone that is not necessarily like in the trenches of sickness, but maybe is already feeling a little bit better like me, but wants to take it to that next level? Or am I misunderstanding that?
I think the way I like to describe it is that health optimization medicine, the way I practice it and the way we train, is it becomes the foundation for anything that you're going to be doing otherwise. So you could be at the sickest that you've ever been, or you could be the healthiest that you think you are. And doing a framework like health optimization medicine is going to help you no matter what. Now, in a perfect world, it's in somebody that is, early on feeling well otherwise, not having too many issues, and they want to stay healthy over the long term so that they look at this foundational level. I think about it as it sort of like foundation to everything else that you would do, right? Because if you're so for example, like I have tons of friends that are functional medicine doctors and FDN practitioners, right? And I think it's really, really important because it's so important to do these kinds of things. But what I also often see, not always, but often see is that there is a really significant focus on the disease, the illness, the root cause. And I think that is a good thing. However, if you start going after root causes without having a foundation where everything is going to be settled on, then sometimes what can happen is that you're kind of like playing whack-a-mole, where you might have improvement a little bit, but you don't have an improvement a lot because you haven't really focused on like how well your cells are working. Like, do your mitochondria have the right optimized vitamins, minerals, and nutrients to actually work when you're going after that Lyme, you're going after that mold, or going after that detox program. And so where health optimization really fits is like, okay, all of that's happening. Good, not good. It's not good. Like, we know it needs to be addressed. But if you don't address that foundation, at least concurrently, you may not see the benefits long-term of going after some of those things, right? Going after the Lyme, going after the mold, going after whatever. And so what I often find is that health optimization becomes a really great foundation for all of that. And in that context, that's how I think about it. My typical clientele are people that are pretty well optimized. Like, they feel pretty good. Maybe they have a couple of different things that are going on. Maybe they're getting a little older. Like my main clientele is between 45 and 75 for the most part. Like, they're looking at that stage of their life where they're really looking to make sure they stay healthy for the long term, right? And one thing we talk about health optimization medicine all the time too is that we're not focused on longevity as much as we're really focused on health span, right? And that's why we're optimizing between 21 and 30 years of age. That's why we have such a focus on reversing those markers to that level, and then looking at this metabolomic level as well, because that level is so important from a detecting deficiencies and toxicities that may not be showing for 5, 10, 15 years later. And that's why it could be so beneficial. But I think, in essence, the short answer to your question is that even if you're really quite sick and you're at a tough place, I think that health optimization medicine can be a great place for you as well. But it might be one of those things where you want to work with a provider that does both. Something that, what I do in clinical practice is mostly focused on health optimization medicine, and then I focus on hyperbaric therapy and other things that I do. But I refer people all the time to FDNs, to functional docs, and other practitioners that can do a lot of the work for mold and Lyme and like significant detox while I'm doing foundational work at the same time with them. Because that's where I've seen like a really great synergy over the years.
Yeah, well, and if FDNs are doing what they're taught, Reed Davis, the founder of FDN, is totally in alignment with you, because and I'm not just kissing butt here. This is actually a image that he shows in the course that has made more sense to me over time, and I've realized like, oh, that was actually the perfect image. So one of the first things you learn about in the course is metabolic chaos, and it's like you dropped a bunch of stones into water, a still water, and then you see the ripple effect. But all these circles are overlapping, and the reason that this has become more profound to me over time, and I realize how great of an image it is because he uses that to reference. He's like, not only does the root cause not even matter per se, he's like, if I throw all these stones in, you tell what's the original ripple. Well, I can't tell you. And that's the point. All these things are now interacting with each other. And that's why we have to take this whole person, whole body approach. So definitely philosophically in alignment with you. What I would like to know then is, because I would imagine you utilize some lab testing or some things, just standard diagnostic tools. Maybe it's a little bit different for each client. I'm not sure, but I would love to know how you work. So if that 45-year-old comes into your office physically or virtually, however you work, that is feeling overall good, but then again, wants to take it that step further. And I love that you said, I hope people caught that, health span over longevity. Because guess what? Living to 115 is probably pretty darn cool. But if those last 15 years of your life are in and out of hospitals and medications and all that stuff, well, that's not the same as health span. So I like that you said that. But what would it look like for me? If I'm 45, I feel pretty good. Am I going to get some lab testing with you, or how does that work?
Yeah, so what I would typically say here is that you said it perfectly. And I love that FDN has that framework as well, which is, you're looking at that foundation, right? You're not just looking at, what's happening sort of with all those ripples. And I use that analogy. It's kind of funny you use that analogy. I use that analogy in hyperbaric medicine sometimes when it comes to brain injuries, and how a traumatic brain injury can be like a lot of pebbles in your brain that you need to, all the ripple effects. And that's why you can heal it using hyperbaric therapy, interestingly enough. So, I think that, if somebody comes to me and they're looking at laboratory testing, what I typically do is I do a full metabolite testing protocol, which includes organic acid testing. I use Genova Diagnostics a lot, actually, as my main lab that I use, because they have a great metabolomics test called the NutriVal. And that particular test is also great because the Genova uses a very specific range, which is that 21 to 30 years of age range. The challenge with a lot of laboratory tests out there, even companies that I like a lot, they're mostly using 18 to 65 as their normal range. And the challenge with that is I think it's too big of a number. I think it's too big, like of a range of people that said, this is your healthy range. They take healthy people between 18 and 65 and they make a normal, and they normalize it out using, 21 or 30 people, 30 males and 30 females or something like that to get the power statistical significance and things like that. Mm-hmm. For me, that's a little bit concerning because I just don't know how to interpret those ranges as much. So that's why I like Genova for that reason. So I typically do a full metabolomics panel with my patients, which is about 500 data points just with that particular test. It's urine and blood. And then I do a stool assessment as well. I do a gut assessment typically with Genova as well, like a 3-day stool assessment, looking at gut metabolites, but also looking at inflammation, maldigestion, metabolic imbalance, dysbiosis, pathogenic bacteria, things like that. And then sometimes I'll use a food sensitivity test as well as my 3 initial tests that I typically use with people. And that's usually a really great way for me to get a good foundational assessment. And then I'll often be doing hormones as well in people that are a little bit older, looking at hormone optimization, looking at hormone metabolites. That's kind of my framework that I typically use for most people. And that might sound familiar to a lot of people that are listening that are doing FDN work as well. But again, my framework is just a little bit different. My framework is not looking at how I can help them with their disease so much. Mm-hmm. My framework is like, how can I just optimize their health? And they're very compatible, I'm sure, looking at how these things work together. And from there, it's like, okay, well, now how do I create an optimization strategy using all that data, knowing their diet, their lifestyle, their stress, and everything else. And then getting them started on a program that's going to be dietary changes, lifestyle changes. It's going to be supplementation. And then, oftentimes what I'm also doing is like, well, how can I help them right now along that path with things like, other compounds or supplements or dietary strategies that can help them now too.
Awesome. If you guys haven't, I'm sorry for not asking this earlier. If you guys have any questions for Dr. Scott, let us know. I don't know if you've seen the chat, my friend. I'm glancing over to my TV here. I didn't know you brought a fan club with you from our audience. So that's pretty cool.
Did I? Okay.
Yeah, we had, you know that you're important if the founder's wife, Raywin, gets on. So she said, hey, in the beginning, which is great. A lot of other hellos. Wendy Handy, who actually, she's an FDN that works for Dr. Will Cole, says, love your products.
Oh, yeah. Will's great.
Podcasted with our very own Debbie Potts. She said that you were just podcasting with her.
Debbie's great. I love Debbie. Yeah. Hi, Debbie.
Okay. And then what food sensitivity test do you use?
So I typically, I go back and forth here. I think that there's no perfect food sensitivity test. The way I think about using these typically as is an initial screening test for people to get a feel from what might be happening. I'll use the Genova's IgG typically, but there's other good tests out there too. What I find helpful here is just getting like an overall barometer for just sensitivities in general. Like if they're sensitive to like a lot of things on there, that's usually a good sign that they have a leaky gut as well. So that gives me that. And if it's very specific types of food, that can be helpful. But in essence, I don't typically repeat it after the first time. It's more me getting a sense of inflammatory, what's the word? Their inflammatory load, really, because and there's certain things that I can take out from a food perspective that are pretty obvious. And then, as I was alluding to earlier as well, when talking about not having dairy until I was 7, for most people, I do recommend taking a break from dairy and gluten for at least a 3-month period of time, just to see if they feel better off of them, even if it didn't show up on a panel that showed that they were dairy gluten sensitive. Because those panels are notoriously bad at showing those particular 2 types of food sensitivities that I found over the years. And so for me, I usually start off with those 3 tests as kind of my foundation. And the food sensitivity one I usually use because it can be very helpful to remove certain foods in the beginning that might be causing more inflammation in the gut. It's kind of a chicken before the egg scenario is what I tell my patients. It's like, you don't know if the food itself is causing inflammation in the gut or if the gut's inflamed already and the food is just making things worse, or that the food is looking like it's causing an issue, but it's really the gut's inflamed already. So in those cases, I typically remove things for 3 or 6 months, and then I'll add them back in over time as we kind of optimize their gut, their cellular metabolites, their diet, their lifestyle. And a big one that's sort of overarching all of this too is their sympathetic versus parasympathetic balance, right? Because I think what I always can really assess very quickly with patients now, because I've been doing this a long time, is that if a client is in sympathetic overdrive, if their nervous system is imbalanced in the way that they're always in fight or flight, or almost always in fight or flight, there's no way that any supplement that I give them, any dietary change that I give them is going to change much. And if you don't look at that level of things, ahead of time as a practitioner, I promise what you're going to do to try to help your patients from like food changes, lifestyle, supplementation, it's not going to work. And that's been a big lever for me over the last many years of clinical practice to understand that if we don't work on balancing that, what I call the sympathetic spiral of doom, that you're not going to see the benefits that you'd likely see otherwise.
Sure. We did have another question here. I promise I'll get to that one. I wanted to follow up because I'm like, holy cow, there was a lot to get to today. Some guests they have so much knowledge that I'm like, 50 minutes is not enough, but we'll do what we can here. So the sympathetic spiral, I did want to talk about that as well, because I know it was one of the main points you wanted to get across. I'm sorry to it's an awkward transition, but what does that refer to and what does that actually mean?
Yeah, I mean, there's really a great transition here. We've been talking about how when you're looking to work with patients, what you really want to make sure you do is understand where they're coming from and understand where they are in their health journey, right? And so we know that we can do some great lab testing. FDN practitioners do great lab testing. We do great lab testing, health optimization medicine, which is very synergistic. We can do a great dietary history. We can do great lifestyle history. But overarching all of this, in my clinical practice experience now, is what is their autonomic nervous system doing, right? And the autonomic nervous system is your sympathetic and your parasympathetic nervous system, right? That's the autonomic nervous system. That system has these two pieces of it. Your sympathetic nervous system is your fight or flight nervous system, which is supposed to be active when you're getting chased from a lion or by a lion, or your kid is going to get injured in something. Like that's when your sympathetic nervous system is supposed to go online. And your parasympathetic nervous system is your relaxation, rest, digest. When you eat food and relax and digest, your parasympathetic nervous system is going to come on. But the problem with modern life is that most people are living in this sympathetic overdrive way too much. So sympathetic is that on. So this is when I was referring to not sleeping when I was in medical school. Sleep is for quitters. You'll sleep when you're dead, right? Sleep is the most important parasympathetic activator that we have. And if we're not getting enough sleep, we're not going to be able to regulate our nervous system this way, okay? But there's so many other aspects of this hustle culture that all of us live in that we don't really appreciate that our base state should not be in sympathetic mode. Our base state should be in relaxation, rest, digest, because this is when we heal. This is when we detox. This is when we actually, on the other side of things, actually build muscle. So if you are an athlete and you want to build muscle and strength, you don't build muscle in the gym. You build muscle when you're relaxing after being in the gym. So if you're always in fight or flight, what happens is that you are always releasing these neurotransmitters, these hormones, things like cortisol and norepinephrine and epinephrine that are stimulating the mitochondria in your body, which are the part of your body that's making energy, to make more and more energy. But the problem is that over time, this is going to start breaking down. And your mitochondria are going to get into this place where they're like, I can't make enough energy to support what you want. You're always in sympathetic overdrive. And then they start breaking down and start putting out stress signals themselves that you need to start making more sympathetic activation to try to get more of what's required for the mitochondria to work better. And so it becomes this sort of spiral where you have the sympathetic overdrive, you have mitochondrial dysfunction, and they feed on each other, okay? And I see this so much now in my patients that if you don't think about addressing this spiral immediately by both addressing the sympathetic overdrive and the mitochondrial piece at the same time, you're not going to see benefits long-term in your patients, okay? And here's an example, right? Somebody comes into you, right? They have fibromyalgia for 20 years. Like, I've seen every doctor. I've been on every medication. I don't like this diagnosis. I don't know what to do, and you're my last resort, right? And this happens, right? If you just try to give them more supplements and just try to change their diet, it's not going to work, right? Because you haven't addressed what's very likely happening is that sympathetic overdrive that's been pushing them in various ways and not serving them over the long term. This could be sympathetic overdrive because if they've had a disease for a long period of time and they've felt poorly for a long time. It could be sympathetic overdrive because they had trauma as a child and they don't feel safe. This happens a lot. And if you don't address that at the same time as working on that mitochondrial side and that support, you're not going to see the benefit. And then in the reverse, okay, if you just work on that sympathetic overdrive by downregulating their nervous system in various ways, and there's lots of really great ways to do this immediately, and then long-term working on their stress and why they feel this way, they're left with mitochondria that don't work very well because they've been so overdriven and dysfunctional because of that sympathetic overdrive. So in my world, in my clinical framework, health optimization medicine is a fantastic long-term solution for the mitochondrial piece, which also we would call the cell danger response that happens over time. And then I also refer people out all the time for stress mitigation, for ways to optimize that and downregulate their nervous system. This could be anything from psychedelic therapy in some people to working with therapists, to understanding what trauma that they've had, to any number of things. But in the short term, how are you going to optimize their system right now? Well, you're going to optimize it by looking at that sympathetic overdrive. And I use the GABA system here very, very significantly to do that, because GABA is our primary inhibitory neurotransmitter in the brain that calms down the brain. And then I use a lot of methylene blue, actually, which is a really cool and novel compound to help support mitochondrial function right now.
Man, I'll follow up with this. I have to with the GABA thing, because I had seen that in something else that you posted when I was looking at your stuff. So with the GABA thing specifically, I don't know how many gene tests you run, and that's not even a foundational lab at FDN. It's not a foundational lab for me. But I have found that I'm someone that's just ever so slightly overexcitable. And then I meet people like you who talk at a similar pace to me, if not faster. And I'm like, all right, I would imagine, or I'm not surprised that you had trouble with the whole sleeping thing when you were pursuing your career initially. So do you ever find that people, if you do genetic testing at all, do you ever find that they have those like GAD1 mutations? Because I have one, and I was just kind of curious if that's something that you see come up a lot since you mentioned GABA.
So, it's interesting you mentioned genetics. I don't typically actually check genetics myself,
Okay.
But I do think it's an interesting piece of the puzzle for some people, because then they go, oh, this is why I'm overexcitable. This is why, and that can certainly be true. The thing about genes and genetics is, remember, we always have to remember that there's different penetration of genes. So some people have a gene that expresses itself in an abnormal way 10% of the time, and some people have it 100% of the time. You don't know kind of where you fall into that realm. But from a clinical perspective, GABA deficiency is mostly a clinical diagnosis at this point, right? Because what happens with GABA deficiency is that you don't have enough GABA around, and you have increased levels of depression, insomnia, anxiety, tremors, because you have what we would call glutamate overload, glutamate toxicity kinds of symptoms, because glutamate and GABA are imbalanced in the brain all the time. And so if you're overstressed and your parasympathetic nervous system doesn't know how to turn on, then you're going to deplete GABA over time. And so what you can do there is you can do a couple different things clinically to see how people react to increasing their GABA levels. And the thing about this that's important is, as a provider, GABA supplements do not work. So taking GABA as a supplement on its own, GABA is too big of a molecule to get into the brain and cause an increase in GABA, unless you have a leaky brain, which would correspond oftentimes to a leaky gut, a leaky blood-brain barrier. So if you take GABA and it works for you, you often have a leaky gut. And I've had tons of patients over the years that just one recently, like, doc, I was using GABA supplements, they were working with me, and then we started optimizing his gut and improving gut integrity, and the GABA supplements stopped working because GABA couldn't get across anymore, right? So there's microbiome changes that can be very helpful for the GABA system. So Lactobacillus and Bifidobacterium, for example, both produce GABA signaling in the gut, but they don't affect GABA directly. They do it via the vagus nerve. But GABA is mostly just made in the brain. And so it's that balance between glutamate and GABA that's important. So, but you can use other things that can enhance the GABA system very quickly to give you a sense if the GABA system really needs to be back, in an optimized way. And the one that I don't recommend you use is alcohol, right? Alcohol binds very closely and very, very tightly to the GABA receptor, making it very difficult for what happens is you deplete GABA very quickly. Benzodiazepines do this, sleep drugs do this. That's why they feel good, but they also have addictive capacity, tolerance and withdrawal, dependence, all those kinds of things, right? And so what you want to do is really balance that GABA receptor a little bit more holistically, and using things like kava and CBD and CBG, and also hanakyle from magnolia bark. These are all really, really good because they can bind to the GABA receptor in separate sites to help that system work a little bit better. But the problem with the ones I just mentioned is that they bind on separate sites to where GABA would bind, and that they can also deplete GABA over time if you're not careful. So giving something that's actually going to give you GABA while you're doing that is important. And I use something called nicotinol GABA, B3 GABA, and also, which is a vitamin B3 attached to the GABA. That gets across into the brain, no problem. And then I also use something called agarin, which is, you mentioned in the intro, agarin's from a psychedelic mushroom called the amanita mushroom. And that mushroom itself is really great because it can get across into the brain. And it's not psychedelic. Amanita mushroom is psychedelic at higher doses, but it's a great way to support the GABA system.
Don't worry. We'll take a few more questions, guys. This is too good. And you just took me on this mental roller coaster. I enjoyed the ride, by the way. But you did take me on this, if you couldn't tell while I was looking at you, because so you said originally GABA can't pass the blood-brain barrier. And then I'm thinking in my head, I've been in this space for 12 years. I've heard that before. Now, I always challenged that, not because I didn't think they were telling the truth. I'm like, there's got to be something that we're missing because these work for me. Then you said that again. I'm like, all right, well, he's really smart. It must be placebo. Then the next roller coaster turn that you hit me with is, but if you have a leaky gut and a leaky brain, it might work for you. So I don't know whether it's placebo, that would be the most positive view of it here, or that leaky brain thing. But I'm like, holy cow, because I was just going under a very high period of stress recently when we moved to Austin, Texas. It's just huge culture shock and getting everything moved. It's nuts. We're moving like once a year on average right now. It's not good. And
yeah, you got to stop that.
I took some. And I'm like, I don't care if it's placebo, whatever, it's working. But I would say it does seem like it's working. So I need to look into some other things there as well.
What I would say there, just to kind of small caveats, is that nanoliposomal GABA may work in some people. So if it's like it's in a liposome itself, or if you're taking very, very high amounts of GABA, like if you're taking like 3 grams of it, like then some like maybe small percentage will get into the brain typically. But there could that's the data is pretty clear that there's really no great evidence that GABA can get into the brain on its own. But again, everybody's going to be different. But I've spoken to tons of my functional colleagues over the years. And I remember like the first lecture I gave on GABA, 3 colleagues came up afterwards like, it's just diagnostic for me. If I see that GABA works for them, always have a leaky brain or leaky gut, And so again, you can have a leaky brain without a leaky gut as well, to be clear.
Okay.
It doesn't always have to be a leaky gut, but that's the most common reason. The most common correlation is that you see a leaky gut and a leaky brain, and you heal up the gut, the brain, the blood-brain barrier works as well. So, but there could be other reasons, like if you have like long COVID, for example, or chronic inflammatory autoimmune issue or mold or something like that, and the gut's better, there is at least a theory theoretically that you could have a leaky brain still if you have chronic brain inflammation still. So I've had some interesting experience in also using some low dose nicotine in here and seeing some really interesting responses from an anti-inflammatory brain immune system perspective as well. But that I know we don't have a lot of time, and there's a lot of other ways I can go here. But I would say sort of high level for people, the sympathetic spiral of doom is so much more common than you realize. And that if you're looking to really optimize them from a health perspective, taking dietary wise, supplement wise, you really have to focus on mitochondrial health for sure. But you also have to think about that sympathetic overload, that overdrive, because if they're living in a place where they're mostly in sympathetic, they're not going to heal no matter what you do. Or they're not going to get as well as they hope they will get, and you hope they will get as well. So in my world, it's about really looking at that sympathetic overdrive and looking at the GABA system as one of the major levers that you can pull to see a major benefit very quickly. And then you can use things like the supplements that I mentioned, the Agarin, the Hanakyle, the Kava. You can use those to help people get a feel for how it would feel for their sympathetic nervous system to downregulate. Mm-hmm. That is where there is for them. And then they can learn how to do breath work, meditation, yoga, like certain types of exercise to get there more often, not using supplementation. But getting the feeling of what that feels like could be really powerful for people. And then from there, they can learn how to do it over the long term by doing the things that I just mentioned. And then also dealing with things like childhood trauma or a bad relationship or a snoring partner that keeps them up every night. These are things that will change their sympathetic system dramatically, but may not be the things that they can do immediately. So, but getting the feeling of that stress being off and that sympathetic nervous system being downregulated is extremely powerful. So just as a clinician, don't forget about that, because that was a big part for me when I realized if I don't address this with my patients, even before I do like major supplementation, nothing's going to change, or very little is going to change.
Man, because I know you don't know me or my story with this. There's just so many dots that you're connecting for me. I mean, I love that idea and that concept too of, providing a natural, safe supplemental thing for these clients so that they can feel that. I'm very transparent about my story. I've shared something like this on the show before, but when I was in high school, I was abusing drugs. I had panic disorder, depression. I'm not excusing it. I'm just saying that those things did lead to drug experimentation and abuse. And I will never forget. I hate that I have this in my memory because it just sounds like a drug addict. But I was one. I took a benzodiazepine Xanax for the first time, not prescribed. And that was still to this, I hate to say this, but I'm lying if I don't say it this way. That was one of the best feelings I had ever felt in 30 years of being on this earth. And I was only like 16, 17 at the time. And for those that don't know and haven't been stupid enough to abuse those things, that class of drugs in general, especially Xanax in particular, they don't have euphoric properties. So the significance of that means if someone takes cocaine or methamphetamines or whatever, I'm not advocating for this, but you get a euphoric property to it. That's why you're getting addicted. There's that dopamine high, whatever, because it's a different type of addiction in a sense. I'm speaking loosely. Xanax doesn't do that. You don't get this like tickle in your brain and feel like you have a warm hug or something like that. It was the fact, Scott, like you said, you're giving that to your client for the first time, but with a supplement, not with that. My shoulders dropped. I had this headache that always was there in the back of my head. That went away. It was almost like my vision cleared. I have no idea how to describe that. My focus was better. And that led to some very poor decisions after that, because my 16-year-old logic, well, if that worked well, a whole lot more is going to work better. That didn't go too well.
Yes,
but to be able to provide that in a similar way that's more natural and supplemental, to let them know what that baseline is, I think that's brilliant. And to just give people hope too, to know that can be that. I knew it could happen, but I thought it could only happen through a drug at that time.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's actually a unfortunately beautiful description of somebody that's been GABA deficient all their life. Yeah. And for the first time ever, you had enough GABA around, probably because of the genetic thing that you mentioned too. And then this is why alcoholism runs in families, actually, in these kinds of situations, because alcohol makes some people feel normal. And that normal feeling is what you just described, right? But the challenge with alcohol, with benzos, as we mentioned, is that they bind so tightly to the receptor that they cause GABA deficiency over time. And so at our company, Troscriptions, we really try to formulate where you're combining these things together, something that binds to where GABA would bind, so you don't actually deplete GABA while you're enhancing the affinity for GABA to bind itself. So that's called an obligate pair, is what we call it. And so the deal there is that GABA deficiency is so much more common than we realize. And so you want to give something that's going to enhance the GABA system. You have to make sure you're not depleting GABA in the process. And so, but there's also, the building blocks of it, right? So glutamine is your amino acid that turns into glutamate in the brain, and glutamate gets converted into GABA. So you have to have enough glutamine around to be able to make enough GABA too, but you got to be careful how much glutamine you give, because that can also be overstimulating depending on the person. So like when it comes down to it, for me, from like a long-term perspective, I'm optimizing their gut. I'm optimizing their micronutrients. You need B6 and magnesium in optimal levels to convert glutamate over to GABA, for example. So if you're depleted in magnesium and B6, you're not gonna be able to actually convert over easily as well. So for me, it's always how can I help them right now with something that can help and really optimize the GABAergic neurotransmitter system. But the long term, giving them magnesium, giving them B6, optimizing their gut, checking their mitochondria and optimizing that too. So it's a lot to wrap your heads around, right? I understand that, but in essence, what I'm really trying to, I guess, convey is that as a practitioner, if you're listening, or if you're a patient or client of a practitioner, the goal is to understand that nervous system needs to be balanced as best as you can if you're going to heal. That doesn't mean you're not going to be in fight or flight some of the times. You're supposed to be, right? But you're supposed to be like for a little while, and then you're supposed to be like, calm the F down, right? And that's not easy for us to do in this life because we have podcasts and meetings and whatever, right? So, but it's possible. And I think that's really where I want to maybe convey it at the end here, is like, this is all possible, but it's not going to be immediate, especially FDN, health optimization medicine. There's a lot of synergy here, but it takes time to optimize people. So how can you help right now? Well, that's where leveraging the GABA system can be super helpful. Leveraging ways to support mitochondria can be super helpful too.
Yeah. All right, we will. I'm sorry that we didn't get to everything. We'll wrap up with this final thing. Just would you be able to summarize, please, the alternative suggestions to GABA supplementation? I couldn't quite follow what you were saying regarding kava, et cetera. So what were those? Just a summarized version, please.
To summarize is that GABA supplements themselves shouldn't work because GABA is too big to get into the brain. So if it does, they need some work done by all of you that are listening that do FDN work and working on gut optimization. When it comes to actually supporting the GABA system, what I recommend is what's called an obligate pair. It's something we do at Troscriptions at my company. We developed it. We have a patent on it actually because it's so impactful, I think, which is a combination of something that's going to bind to the GABA receptor where GABA would bind. That's called an orthosteric ligand. That's the fancy name. And then something that would bind on the GABA receptor on a separate site, which is called an allosteric site. And what happens there is if you combine them together, This is going to enhance GABA to bind to the receptor and also support the amount of GABA that you have in the body. So we do this by combining things like kava with nicotinol GABA or vitamin B3 GABA. So you want it because you're given the B3 GABA is going to bind directly where GABA would bind, and the kava is going to bind to a separate site. So you're going to have this nice combination where you can have both happening at the same time. You're not going to deplete GABA in the process, which is very nice. So we have something called TroCalm, which gives the B3 GABA, the kava, CBD, and CBG together. All four of those ingredients. The nicotinol GABA, the B3 GABA binds to where GABA would bind. The other four bind to separate sites to increase the amount of GABA that will potentially bind. And then that combination is great for stress, anxiety, down-regulating the nervous system, quieting the mind. So, and then we have something for sleep called Troz, which gives you something called agrin, which I mentioned earlier, and Hanakyle or magnolia bark, which is going to bind to a separate site, and the agrin is going to bind to where GABA would bind. So the summary here in general is that don't use benzos, don't use alcohol as much as you absolutely can. Don't use sleep drugs as much as you can. Try to find things that are supportive to the GABA system. Otherwise, if you can't find our products, things like L-theanine, kava, CBD, CBG, non-psychoactive cannabinoids in general, they're all going to enhance the GABA receptor on those separate sites, which is much better than using a pharmaceutical. But then you think about using something that's also going to bind to where GABA would bind at the same time.
Awesome. I'd love to know where people can find you. And guys, since there's 25 of you on right now, could we please, if you like this today, I'm sorry that we didn't have 2 hours to talk with Dr. Scott, but you can find him a lot of places. If we could drop a thank you below, that would be amazing for him. But yes, where can they find you and connect with you? Because even if they didn't get all the questions answered today, there's plenty of places they can connect with you.
So my website is kind of my global site is drscottsherr.com, DrScottsherr.com. So you can find my information about my consulting, my health optimization practice, my hyperbaric work, if you're interested there. The company Troscriptions is the company that makes some of the products that I was talking about here, Troscriptions.com. It's at Troscriptions on Instagram and websites and YouTubes and things like that. And then we do a lot of education there about the sympathetic spiral of doom, at least I do. And then I talk a lot about methylene blue as well as another product that we use for mitochondrial support now while you're doing the longer and harder work of optimizing health. And then if you're interested in health optimization medicine, you can check it out at homehope.org. We have a 7-module certification for practitioners of all types. We've had a number of FDNs actually go through our program over the years too. And I think all of you are really well trained already. This is just an additional perspective that might be very helpful. And those are the places to find me. So thanks, guys. I know there are a lot of great questions. I'm sorry we didn't get to everything, but maybe another time. I'm happy to answer questions otherwise in different venue if needed. So,
well, I hope you don't get mad at me. We do have a signature question for the show to finish up, and I have 0% guess as to where you're going to go with this, so I'm very excited. The signature question is, if we were to give you a magic wand and you could get all of our viewers and listeners to do just one thing for their health. So that means you can get us all to start doing one thing, or you can get us all to stop doing one thing. What the heck is the one thing Dr. Scott gets us to do?
Can I curse or can I not curse?
It is up to you. I would not, but it is up to you.
Calm down.
I was wondering where you were going with that.
I believe myself. Just calm down. Find ways to calm down your nervous system. Everything else is going to get better. I promise that you cannot do more to calm down. It's doing less. So please find ways to calm the F down.
Thank you very much. That's awesome. Guys, FDNtraining.com/FDN Black Friday. If you'd like to join us next week, we'll be off a little off on the podcasts. And please, I always ask this every single time. This is a space where we need as much support as we can get. Now, Dr. Scott has a more mature following than a lot of our people that we have on here. But even if you're not going to buy anything, you're not going to work with someone, that's fine. Just simply following them, engaging with their content, that means the world to all of us in a space that is not always considered favorable or highlighted by the mainstream. Every little voice, every little like, every little comment of support really does help. So at the very least, please go shoot him a follow. We would appreciate that. And Dr. Scott,